This episode of Ubercube is an homage, an ode to Feldon of the Third Path. Rest his soul. Saddest magic card ever made.
In the arms of an angel.
Welcome to...
I feel like if we were like a YouTube channel, then that's what we would do. We would have Sarah McLachlan playing. We would have like The Rescue, and it would be full of like the Feldons and all the like cards of yesteryear. You know, it's about time someone does that. That's like the kind of
Instead
content.
of sad puppies, it's all the pet cards.
Exactly.
Cut out of your cubes.
It's the sad Feldons with his cane and all the puppy dogs.
Welcome to Feldon of the Third Path Cube. This is your host, Anthony Adams, back from Alaska, where it was a perfect 55 to 60 degrees, so Uber Bears were quite content. And for those that did not see that little, I guess, my montage of bear photographs that I posted on the socials, I will post them up again. But my family, the whole time we were in Alaska, every time we saw actually a living bear or a wooden bear or anything that was a bear, they made me stand in front of it and try to mimic the pose of the said bear. So it was fun. It was relaxing. It was refreshing.
Were they Ubers?
They were Ubers. They were, in fact, like the real ones, the black bears and the brown bears. I wasn't going to get near them. They are Uber, in fact. But I'm also joined by our other two hosts who I missed very much because we've been doing these kind of duo acts here recently. So we're back in the fold again, back in the saddle again.
It's been a while.
Yeah, we're doing it.
It's been like a month or so.
Well, we knew this month was going to be rocky. Family vacations, beaches, all the things.
It ain't stopping either.
I'm not done either.
It's that time.
No.
But look who we have sitting in front of that beautiful green screen. Hi.
Hi, it's me. It's a May.
Hi, May.
Hi, May.
And this is Anthony Uber Bear, and we got our lovely Stu, as we mentioned before.
That's right.
And what we're going to talk about today, we're going to kind of do a little bit of ode to Feldon of the Third Path, one of the most depressing and iconic stories in all of the history of magic that I had to read about because this flavor text is sad. Besides the fact that you've been looking at the face, the robotic face of his long-lost love, Lauren, the flavor text, she will come back to me. It's just really sad. And then I said, I got to know more. And I read about it, and I wish I had not read it. Oh, my God. It's the most horribly epic story you could ever imagine. And I'm going to totally blunder that. But something about Lauren's captured by, what's her name, Ashnod. Ashnod tortures her, which is really weird to read out loud. And I'm sitting there going through it, and I'm calling my kid over, and he's like, Dad, what are you reading? I'm like, you don't want to know.
No.
And I can keep progressing, and there's something about she's reanimated, brought back from life, but she's so atrocious, so gross, so disgusting that Feldon will avert his eyes away from her, and he's trying to like make robotic parts for her. And yeah, all you lore nerds come at me, but it's the grossest, weirdest, most disturbing love story in magic that I think I've ever read. And this creepy old Santa Claus is sitting in his workshop staring at her face. So yeah. That's where the story ends.
I can't see him as anything other than some creepy Santa Claus. Every time I see this claw. Well, I say every time I see this, the times of seeing this might be starting to dwindle more than they have been previously. And not
his little weird workshop.
And not before time.
So before we go any further, and we're going to talk a little bit about Feldon and other cards that are similar to Feldon in the same vein, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at Ubercube, and we're going to enjoy our refreshments of the show. And we're going to start out with the lovely May. What you having?
I am actually trying to finish off my Cabernet box wine from Costco.
Nice. And I decided to get a little fancy because it is hotter than hell here in North Carolina. Again, I jumped from like 60 degree, 22 hours of sunlight to come to North Carolina where it's like almost 100 degrees. So I decided to take a fresh pineapple, cut it in half, throw it in my Ninja blender, throw in some cantaloupe, throw in some tahini, throw in some fresh oranges, cinnamon, and then I put in some smeared off citrus, topped it off with Tito's, a little bit of grenadine, hit it to the blender really hard, threw some ice in it, and sprinkled some more tahini on top. So it is a spicy, I guess we'll call it an Uber driver. That's what we're going to refer to as screwdriver, but it's the Uber driver.
Sure.
Just to give you some context as well, all right? I'm not going to say I'm jealous of the temperatures that you got to enjoy But yeah, so it has been very hot here in North Carolina. So my kids are on like our neighborhood swim team. And on Tuesday of this week, I go along to do the volunteering. I work these swim meets. And on Tuesday, and I believe Wednesday as well, with the heat index, which is the feels like, incredibly scientific, it was 112 degrees on those 2 days. So just to give you an idea of, it's like North Carolina just exists in this system that's like halfway between the sun and the earth. Or it's like the thing about remember in the sun in Mario when it's chasing you around? That's what living in North Carolina is like. So yeah. But yeah, it's been hot here.
So let's kind of talk about Feldon of the Third Path. Let's break this card down and kind of talk about what this episode's premise is. And it often comes about, as we do here at Ubercube. Stu and I played Magic last night. We cubed. And we cubed Uber Bear's artifact cube.
I did what I do what I say I'm not going to always do, and then I always end up doing it.
He does. And also, I'd like to thank everyone that voted for Uber Bear's Artifact Cube to be once again featured at CubeCon 2025. So thank you very much to everyone that voted. I'm looking forward. This cube is coming back bigger, badder, foilier, and faster than it has ever before. I think I've got like maybe 5 foils left to do out here. So except for Metalworker, as we talked about, I'll never do that because that's insane. But let's talk about Feldon. Feldon of the Third Path for 1 colorless and red. You get a 2/3 legendary creature human artificer. Pay 2 and 1 red. Tap. Create a token that's a copy of target creature in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So what we're looking at here, for lack of better terms, is 3 mana and then an additional 3 mana spread across 2 turns to have this effect. And Stu and I have had some deliberations about the speed and the velocity of my cube and about leaving cards in, even though they're highly flavorful, that I hate to say it, they're almost like pitfalls or traps, even though everything about Feldon of the Third Path screams artifact cube. And in most artifact cubes, I can only imagine that this card will continue to be a house. But I have, as I do with every cube that I've ever owned, always test that border of power. I'm always making my power bands stretch a lot further than I guess most people do, where they do like set cubes based on, say, Kaladesh or Mirrodin or any of these, right? Darksteel, whatever you're choosing, where they stay within, I guess, the parameters of the set, and a lot of the cards kind of balance themselves out from R&D and whatnot.
Certainly in times gone by, if you were like you say, set cubes or block cubes, stuff like that, you are obviously restricted. The power is only going to be as great as the power is during that set or during that block, right? And the cards are going to be designed to synergize with each other. When you have a cube like this, and you can extend it out to any cube, and I will argue that I believe of all the cubes that you have, other than the obvious vintage cube, which, as the name suggests, the power cube, right? It's designed to be the most powerful, the most degenerate things you can do in Magic. The artifact cube, to me, is the one cube that you have consistently continued to power creep as quickly as possible through every iterative nature of Magic, right? Every time there's a new set, every time there's new fancy and shiny things, mechanics that can interact with either existing archetypes within the cube or a new fancy shiny way of doing things, you're putting it in there.
Yeah, it is somewhat deliberate. It is a very technical based cube, right? Where it's very synergistic, pieces and components, while creatures turning sideways do win games as they do. Putting together the parts of the machine still is at the heart of this cube. So as we get new tech that can kind of like, I don't know, support, say, a Hardened Scales deck, I'll put it in there, like the Ozolith, the new one. Or if we get more modular components, I will put that in there because it ties in nicely with the Ozolith and the other tech that I had with Hardened Scales, even though these can be standalone. But what's interesting about this cube is I'm very intentional, and a lot of curators do this, to ensure that cards are standalone as much as possible, meaning like they don't have to be assembled into that configuration to be successful. If I was going to use a subset of cards that people are very familiar with, which we've talked about extensively, it would be like the Kiki Twin combo, where you've got like, was it Pestermite and...
I mean,
Deceiver Exarch.
Yeah, Deceiver Exarch, thank you.
There's Hyrax Tower Scout, I believe it's called, is the one that I have in
Yeah,
my
and you've got
rule
other
commander
you've got other
So
pieces.
yeah.
You can do Zealous Conscripts and whatnot. But what's interesting when you look at the Deceiver Exarch and you look at the Pestermite, as May has mentioned before, while they are standalone cards, they can also be deceiving to people playing them, expecting, because they've become so, I guess, tethered at the hip to the idea of the Kiki Twin combo. When people see that, they're looking for something to make those cards successful.
They are signpost cards, in my opinion. Deceiver
Not through their own fault, but
not through their own fault.
The players made it happen.
Just notoriety of the combo that exists in many cubes. Certainly it was a staple in the vintage cube for a while. So yeah, it's natural that a player sees that kind of engine piece, they're going to expect to see the other piece with it.
As we kind of talked about, though, through intent, and I'm going to go through a few more, like, say, the KCI combo. In last night's draft, I played KCI solo and didn't have the rest of the pieces to complete the combo because the card on its own is a really good sack outlet and allows me to ramp. And that's exactly what my deck last night wanted to do, is to get into the big bads, right? Triplicate Titans and whatnot. But if you look at all the pieces of the KCI combo, each one of those, also like Scrap Trawler and all these parts, you don't need the combo to make those cards special. So that is kind of a design goal that I have in this cube, is to ensure that cards just aren't alone, right? Or they can be played alone, but they don't only fit into the singular like combo or the singular finish, or one deck can only play this entire card because it has no versatility, no modality to the drafter nor the player or the constructor. So that is kind of a design goal that I play by. And I know, May, you lean into that all the time, even with the Fey Cube, right? Your cards are intentionally standalone, yet can work together.
Yeah, so that's actually a big foundational philosophy of the design of the Fey Cube, is that I wanted to have pieces that can synergize with the deck, but make sure that they, work individually as cards. Like, for example, Imperious Prefect, right? Where this is a card where, yes, obviously it buffs your elves, but it also makes the elves to buff, right? You can play it on its own and not feel bad. And I feel like that was an important core principle going into something that's extremely rails heavy, right? But whether or not we can consider something like Feldon extremely railsy or independent, I feel like is our way to kind of rope back into the conversation about our pet cards.
Let me wheel this back into this, though, real quick. Even if a card doesn't do as, I guess, the promise on the card, which we've talked about before. Feldon promises a lot of things. Feldon promises that you're going to have something in your yard that's highly impactful, that you're going to recur, and then perhaps whenever it leaves the battlefield, maybe you'll get an ETB, maybe you get an LTB, right? And then they're impactful, and then you swoop in and you get some kind of just creature on attack effect. All the above, right? Like a sneak attack type version of a spell. But when I'm looking at, I guess, the orbits we talked about the 5 orbits. We had an episode where we discussed that, and power bands. We've talked about these things. When I'm looking at Feldon, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, is extremely live the dream. When it happens, it happens. It doesn't, it doesn't. But back to my base question. Even if it doesn't, and some listeners may be thinking this already, I'm paying 1 and 2 mountains for a 2/3 creature. I can still attack with that worst case scenario. As you do with the Llanowar Elves that's doing nothing. As you do with a Mirror that's doing nothing. It's still impactful in the sense that it does 2 damage. So I think when we're evaluating cards and we look at all these sophisticated attributes of the said card and things, the dream, the promise, the thing that's stamped on here, if I couldn't pull this off, and this was what I was trying to debate with you last night on the ride home, I'm still going to just turn this sideways. I'm not just going to sit here waiting for the thing to materialize. Would you agree with that? I mean, there's a point where you just got to go for it.
If you're saying that you can put creatures onto the battlefield and turn them sideways, yes, actually. And I don't know if any of our listeners, maybe they're new to Magic or whatever, but yes, that is one of the things that you can do with creatures, is play them and turn them sideways.
But now I want to pin to something else you said last night. Well, that joke is meant to stand up, because this stand-up comedy goes all night. But then, now that I've made that decision to play this as a 2/3 for 3, then I'm now considering, as you mentioned, deck equity. and for that matter, cube equity. As in, this takes a space. And does this role player, outside of the base stats of a 2/3 that I can tackle with, and that was a really strange argument I made, but does this card still actually hold its own and belong in this environment? Question mark, right?
Right.
And I think the determination of the crowd is that this one now has been kind of power crept out or ran out of the cube by the virtue of all the things moving forward, the new tech, the counters. It just can't compete until you get that triplicate Titan in the yard. Live the dream, as May had stated. Other than that, the card might just sit there as a 2/3 for a long time, requiring setup.
It can.
It can.
It can.
Or it
you
can't.
hope that that's not the case, because there's something so wonderful about living the dream, right, May? There's something so wonderful about being able to pitch that massive creature into your graveyard and then be able to make copies of it and swing like crazy and turn a game around or just take over the game. But that requires quite a bit of setup, right?
It does.
And I will say this. This is the second time I've played Feldon in a cube in the last maybe couple of years. Right? The last time I played this, and I can't even remember what cube we were playing, but I remember I was playing against Christian, and we were both in the 2-0 bracket, and he had just a very, very fast deck, very, very aggressive, and I was able to get Feldon out. I was literally blocking like my life depended on it, just trying to preserve my life total. Eventually, I got to the point where I was able to stabilize with Feldon. I was actually using Feldon very defensively for a long time because it was just a way for me to get creatures out to be able to block the onslaught that I was facing. And eventually, Christian runs out of creatures. You know, I'm creating copies of large enough creatures to block profitably, even though he's trying to squeeze through those last few pieces of damage. I've got other pieces of interaction, and I managed to take the game, right? Very exciting. But that wasn't your artifact cube, for sure. And to put this into context, the games that I played yesterday, and I lent very heavily on Feldon and Goblin Welder and Birthing Pod. Those are the three. I thought, you know what, we've talked about Goblin Welder in the past, and Feldon has been a card that I've criticized at times. I felt it long outlived its usefulness or its value in Anthony's Vintage Cube, and I'd said I really do think that this is just a little bit too slow. I think it outlived Vintage by a very long time, but now I think it's just a little bit too slow in the Artifact Cube. Game one, I play against our good friend Chris. He's playing the Hardened Scales +1/+1 counters deck. The last time we drafted the Artifact Cube, I drafted that deck, and it was bonkers powerful. And in my second game, I played against our good friend Tom. Tom had a blue shocker. Tom always plays blue control-y deck, and he basically
Chrome Seed Shark.
It was Chrome Host Seed Shark.
Yeah, Chrome Host.
So it was
Chrome
basically
Host.
Get that out. I was trying to get Birthing Pod out. Birthing Pod got Force of Willed, and he just had just monstrous tokens to attack me with on like turn 4 or 5, right? So I wasn't able to start getting any engine going. And I had Goblin Welder out, so I'm thinking, man, I really hope that you can put something of low value in your graveyard, because it would be nice for me to be able to, put those pesky tokens that have got 5 and 6 counters that are in the game into the graveyard. They're gone forever, stabilize a bit. The opportunity never arose.
Okay, so all that was for context, so that you could get the story. And we've talked about this before. I want to put a little clip right here. So May, you and I have talked about this extensively as curators. And Stu and I had our deliberation, as we do in our car ride, always home. It's always either someone celebrating or someone griping. There's really no middle ground here for him and I in the car. But we've talked about this. When you receive feedback from someone who played your cube, and this was one singularity, one time, He didn't even match up against me. He may have played very well against my deck. We don't typically go to the 3-0 bracket. We always just kind of end on 2s. For whatever reason, we never actually in our play group ever finish a cube.
Well, we're trying to get more drafts.
We're trying to get more drafts in, so we rotate around. But my point is Stu had an experience last night, and he basically got the floor wiped with him. And he tried some stuff that was very tinkery, very, very Goblin Welder-ish, right?
It's a tool. Yeah, it was a toolboxy.
Toolboxy.
Deck. Yeah.
But my point is, May, when someone gives you feedback on that one time at Bandcamp scenario, and this is just a broad thing here, I then have to process that, and I deliberated on the way home, and he normally makes pretty good arguments. In this case, he did on one. Another one, I think he failed. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But my point is you have to ruminate on it, think about it, and just don't make changes because of that one scenario. Where do you stand with that statement, May?
So I definitely agree. I feel like that people are too inclined to make immediate decisions. It doesn't mean that you ignore all criticism. It just means that you take time to actually like digest it and like actually work through kind of the outcome and work through the end lines of what those changes would actually impact in your environment. But more importantly, do either of you remember when we did the episode about Reanimator versus Ramp?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when we talk about Ramp, just as a little callback to that episode, when we talk about Ramp, our two pieces of setup here are we have our piece to ramp, and then we have our thing to ramp to, right? So it's a simple A to B. Versus once you start getting into Reanimator, now you're having to have things worth dumping in the yard, things to dump things in the yard, and then ways to reanimate. You've turned an A to B thing in terms of speed into an ABC thing. Even if the Reanimator stuff can do things faster, it ultimately requires lots of pieces and requires a lot more density and whatnot. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when a lot of these criticisms are being brought up about Feldon and his speed and the way that he is interacting with the environment currently, we have to recognize him as a sort of Reanimator with an asterisk card.
Sure,
right?
I would agree.
Where there is a setup, there needs to be a thing to be worth setting up for, and Feldon himself to like actually continuously keep making tokens of that thing, right? And the reason that I say it as a live the dream thing is because this is not a one card investment. This is a multi-card investment. You are trying to build your deck around doing this thing, and you might have some overlapping synergies and whatnot, but at the end of the day, you need that setup in order to get the payout, right? So the reason that I mention it is because even though we can love this card for what it is, we can love it for its flavor, we can love it for what it does. If we think about a card like Goblin Engineer, for example, it is a creature that enters, you search a library for an artifact, and toss it in the graveyard, right? But that's not all. It also has pay 1, tap, sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it does 2 of the important jobs all by itself without needing additional pieces. And when you're trying to build for limited, that feels like it's a thing that you could reasonably build into without needing to spend a bunch of extra pieces, right? Versus when you look at Feldon as a role, then you have to start thinking about, all right, what are the things that I'm actually trying to get out of this? Or do I have enough ways to like actually get there? And is getting there enough to actually be relevant to the game state, right? And ultimately, when it comes down to speed, the whole advantage that Reanimator has is that you typically have things like, Reanimate, where it's like 1 mana, Stitcher Supplier, 1 mana. Then you have big dumb things you can toss in the yard, right? Versus Feldon is 6 mana across 2 turns in order to reanimate hopefully something decent.
Yeah. It's a big investment.
It's a big investment.
It's a lot to ask.
And you know what? That kind of, we're going to keep switching gears. This is a multi-topic episode. But my artifact cube has been in a very stable place. As in, it's played nicely. We've had less complaints. We've seen matchups, more distributions on archetypes across the table than we've ever seen before. But, and here's the asterisk, when that begins to happen, or that belief that begins to happen, I also put a note in here, there's a degree of complacency that begins to happen from the designer or the curator, right? Where if everything's working, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, it's easy to overlook certain cards that are falling behind just because games and patterns, because I'm not going around in each game when we play Uber's Artifact Cube or whatever cube I'm playing and say, hey, Stu, can I look at your sideboard or are you main decking this, right? That's never something, we don't have a habit of talking about that. Maybe post the game, everybody likes to be braggadocious. We all do and go, hey, May, look at my deck here, see what I got. And it's almost like, I need you to celebrate what I've built. It's the, I made the promise happen and you're going to love everything I did here.
Give me praise.
I have, yes. Not only did you get this cube right, May, but I also perfected your cube in this deck. Please look at it right now. We all do that. And everybody's like, you always flip through, everybody does it. And they're like, yeah, that seems pretty good. Yeah. And they're like, whatever, all right, moving moving on. But everybody does it. Like, it's this little interchange that we have at the table. We like, Stu, let me see what you got. And you're like, oh, cool, you got that card, neat. All right, moving on. All right. So the complacency can happen when everybody says this cube is in a great place. And this is a card that I agree with Stu's assessment, and I agree with May's assessment. There are some things that, and I'll come back to this, but this will tie into our next card we kind of talk about, that do support this inadvertently, as in I've got a distribution of almost 30 cards, and maybe we'll talk about them, but they'll be included in the show notes, or will be show notes for this one. I pulled my list up of cards that either do some kind of looting or rummaging or just direct discard or, say, plane cycling. There are cards that you can just ditch to your advantage. Not as many as you'd say. I don't have, like, the Troll of Khazad-dûm in here. But I do have, like, say, for example, what is it? The Angel that has plane cycling 2, pitch it in the yard, and it comes out, exile either one artifact or one, 2 of something, right? Mm-hmm. And that card's devastating. So something like that with Feldon is the dream, right? Pitch it out, get your planes, set your Feldon up, does take some turns. That can happen. And it can coincide. I want to switch gears again to the deck tech that you built. I believe, based on our conversation last night, you were trying to do too many things. Am I wrong in that? Like, you just said birthing pod, I'm doing welder, I'm doing Feldon. I mean, you're celebrating everything.
So, birthing pod definitely had a secondary role in the deck, I will say, right? So, obviously, primarily, I'm looking at Goblin Welder and I'm looking at Feldon. But that's not, my entire deck is not just built around the fact that I'm trying to get one of those 2 cards out, and if they don't, the whole deck falls apart, right? There was other good pieces in the deck that I felt, okay, I can put some pressure on here, I can do a bit of this, I can do a bit of that. Those were pieces that I felt that if they got out and they stuck, and I was fortunate enough to also have other pieces out that could complement them, then maybe the deck could do something. But this again goes back to, I'm relying on a lot for those cards to be really impactful in a environment where, again, Chris is just overwhelming the board on like turn 3 with hardened scales, and Tom has force of willed a strong play I've made on turn 3, and he's got a bunch of big, artifact creatures out on the battlefield, as well as a Chrome Host Seed Shark and a mitt full of other cards. So it's not just that Feldon by itself, or even Goblin Welder by itself, felt like they were not just fragile, but maybe not as impactful as I would like them to be as individual cards. But I would certainly agree that there was other pieces that I'd put in the deck that in an isolated way kind of didn't do enough, even though maybe with Goblin Welder and with Feldon and with kind of this dreamy scenario, they would have been strong. But you're absolutely right. There was a lot of kind of living and hoping that those things would kind of work out. They didn't. The deck overall was not very strong. Could it have been an exciting and fun deck to play and kind of gone off and done its thing if left unhampered? Yes, absolutely. It probably could. But honestly, by the time it would have been able to get to do that, where realistically with either Birthing Pod or Feldon, I'm talking about turn 4, turn 5, it's just too slow against the other decks that, again, have been power crept into the cube.
So I bring this up for a reason. This is something that we do as designers, as curators of cubes, is we do a post-mortem. And the reason why I want story time from Stu is so that May and I can listen to what Stu's saying, but also try to diagnose at least something in between the lines. And there's some things that I can take away from this conversation. Some thoughts bubbled in my head, and I didn't see the deck, and I wish we had a picture of it laying in front of us, but based on his experience, right? And I think this is a good exercise that I would encourage everyone that has a cube to ask me, tell me more about your experience, right? Even if it wasn't a good one, and try to, I guess, parse out the pieces of what may have been the shortcoming of the cube. And to put this in perspective, I am now, based on this argument, in agreement that Feldon's probably lost its way at this point. Poor Feldon, right? I mean, he's just going to sit in his little toy shop staring at that little creepy face for the rest of his life alone inside of my binder.
Panoramic shot and the Sarah McLachlan just...
It's so weird. But his little 7 shop. But
his little robot head.
Oh
my gosh.
Just like big old eyes. Sitting
it's
in
a
the corner
sad
staring
story.
at
We're
the
making
camera.
it creepy. It's such a
It
sad
is
story.
creepy.
It's a creepy, sad story.
Creepy sad, but it's creepy.
But when I hear this, one thing that I think about, and I'm going to put a comparison, at the last CubeCon, Benjamin Wheeler drafted my Artifact Cube. And one of the criticisms that Benjamin Wheeler had about my Artifact Cube was he couldn't protect his pieces of his KCI combo. And that put me kind of in the tank, right? I was thinking about like what was happening here. And I looked at that deck list. And the first thing that I'll say, and then there'll be a reason why I'm saying it, is his deck was all in on KCI, which is the promise that KCI says I'm going to do. But at the time, through my fault, I didn't have any protection pieces, any like counter plays in there. It was literally all in. I'm going to expose myself. I'm going to play KCI. This is all or nothing. When I do it, it's going to be big. When I don't do it, I'm going to be mad that it didn't complete. But when I'm looking at your cube, I'm hearing a similar story where you're like, I'm trying to Feldon, I'm trying to Welder, I'm trying to do all this. And the first thing that bubbles in my head, and the same thing I saw with that KCI deck, was there was no interaction because you required so many machine pieces to make your deck function, to build that dream, that it's almost a solitary type deck stance.
You can go back to exactly what May said, right? So the reason why I like Reanimator in a vintage cube, played it to great success, is because although you need kind of the part A, part B, part C, so you do need the big creature, you do need them in the graveyard, and you do need to get them out, the pieces that allow you to do that are easy to find. There's plenty of them, right? You've got Reanimate and Animate Dead, and then you've got Tutors, and then you've got a bunch of big creatures, even more so now maybe than ever. You know, even Gristlebrand isn't the superstar that it used to be. So you've got a lot of redundancy, but you've also got pieces that you can fit into the deck. You've got interaction, you've got disruption, you've got removal. So it's easy to build a deck. Even if your game plan to win is quite streamlined, it's still fairly straightforward to build a deck that has both of those win pieces as well as those interactive pieces to protect what you're doing. What I'm trying to do with this, you're absolutely right. It was trying to do a lot. That was just the way that I chose to do it because I felt like it would be fun, but also the fact that Feldon can make creatures tokens out of what's in your graveyard, combined with the fact that Goblin Welder can get stuff from the graveyard, combined with the fact that Birthing Pod can do it, with all of that being, you know, they're all creatures and artifacts, right? And that's what I was going for. They're all creatures, they're all artifacts as well. So I should be able to determine that I'm getting value from all of them. But it did require a lot of pieces that didn't have that secondary interactive element to them. And that's probably, or not even probably, certainly why the deck struggled.
And Mirror Battlesphere was your one, like...
Mirror Battlesphere was one of my top end pieces.
Okay,
yeah.
May?
You know what else black decks have that red decks don't? In terms of like setting up this like reanimator type thing that you're kind of doing with Feldon?
They have everything.
They have redundancy.
Correct.
Like, if you want to reanimate, there's like, what, 6 different versions that exist that are like less than 3 mana?
Yeah,
right?
plenty
like,
of
we
ways.
have so many different options for it that it's easy to just have the alternative available, right?
Yeah.
When you are looking for a big dumb thing to reanimate, we just have so many different options of those that it doesn't even care about color pie at that point. And then for the last and final part of how do we get things in the yard, right? Even though Black for a long time kind of sort of struggled with it, there was a long period of time where we started just getting like a lot of those instants and sorceries that are like, hey, we're just going to start milling some cards, getting cards back, and basically cantripping, right? And while also filling our yard. But all these things have redundancy. How many versions of redundancy do we have for Feldon in red?
Well, that's funny you should mention that because this isn't the same, but based on this kind of spread that we did here and the cost, I already came up with a card because I already agree with his stance. And while it's not redundancy, I'm actually going to cut Feldon, hence the ode to Feldon of the Third Path. I'm looking at Molten Duplication. I've got to order this card. It's kind of hard to find because Commander players, I guess, are, according to my good friend Nathan, are absorbing it for some stupid
it's
Deadpool
really
deck.
good in the Deadpool deck.
Some stupid Deadpool. I love Deadpool, but not in Magic. All right. Molten Duplication for 1 colorless and 1 red. You get a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste until the end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So we got more of a clone ability here. I get more synergies out of that than the live the dream of the repetitive Feldon that's going to keep costing them so much mana. You want to get that triplicate Titan loop, and that's the haha, I did the thing with Feldon, right? And that would be probably the dream in this cube. Hit them for a matter of fact, it wouldn't even be a dream. It'd be a nightmare for your opponent because you think about it, you're swatting them with 9, then they splinter off, or for that matter, Worm Coil. Yes, Worm Coil or the new Worm Coil, whatever is it, Lava Coil.
Lava Coil.
All these things that keep splintering into pieces, they're gross with Feldon.
Absolutely. I want to make copies of Mirror Battlesphere, and then I want to sack one of his little mirrors with Goblin Welder to get my another copy, right? I want to. That's the kind of loop that I'm thinking. That's kind of a dreamy scenario, but like we've been talking about, it requires a lot of these moving pieces, and without a lot, I did have some ways to get stuff in the graveyard, but I don't have tutors. I can't rely on demonic tutor and vampiric tutor for my entomb and my reanimate and my animate dead and so on and so forth, and that's where the fragility of the deck came in.
So the question that I'm going to have for the listeners is just an open one. Okay, Feldon of the Third Path, which we've talked about extensively, in an artifact cube. I want to know how many people that are artificers out there running an artifact cube or something that's artifact centric or a live the dream, or for that matter, any cube whatsoever. Are you still running Feldon of the Third Path? And if so, please write us and tell us why. I want to understand why. Because it's not a bad card. There's nothing wrong with Feldon.
It's a wonderful card.
It's a wonderful card.
I love it.
It's just, unfortunately, because of the speed of my environment, and these other archetypes are literally eating it alive if you don't hit all the pieces. And it's got something to do with more layers to the onion here. Me as a curator, through learning this cube, I've actually exposed a lot more, I guess, intentionally exposed archetypes and synergies so that they can be removed. Interaction is very key. And I want interactive games. I do not want things that give things Shroud. I don't want like Swift Boots. I don't want Lightning Greaves. I don't want these things. So when you got something like Feldon that would be heightened, say if you had haste, so you could try to pull it off that turn and live that dream, I've taken that away with intent. I want exposure. I want games to go back and forth very chess. I don't want you to sit there and give all of your artifact Shroud. That's how this cube once was. It used to be, I would run cards like the Leonin, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, that says all of your artifacts have Shroud. That's a miserable game experience.
Yes.
Like, then you build KCI, just keep the stupid cat up there, and that's all they got to remove before they can even interact with what you're doing behind the field, right? Mm-hmm. They can't do the abrades. They can't do these things. Lauren of the Third Path, rest her soul. Poor Feldon staring at her face right now in his creepy cabin with his little elves. But her little metal face.
Little Santa Claus.
Little creepy Santa Claus.
Creepy Santa Claus. In the arms of the angels.
But it's just a lot to unpack. And I know we went through a lot of pieces in that story. To kind of tie that off, it's multifaceted, right? When I'm looking at Stu's story time on the ride home, I'm wanting to investigate every component that he's telling me. What color were you in? He says red. What are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to do this birthing pod, Goblin Welder, Feldon. I felt like my deck couldn't keep up. What was the deck you're playing against? Hardened Scales. Okay, cool. You got beat to death by Counters deck. They just overwhelmed you. All right, how did you interact with it? I didn't. I couldn't pull off, couldn't get my pieces. Trying to get Mirror Battle Spear, couldn't get it to stick. All right, cool. What was your next deck? Well, I got beat by, was it Chrome Host Seed Shark?
Yeah.
And Force of Will took me out. So now I'm playing against a blue player. So now my red deck can't beat that. All of that's contextualized. Stu's emotional last night.
Let's be honest.
Breaking it down.
Let's be honest.
But your points were fair.
They did come from an emotional, like, hey, I, haven't played Magic in like forever. And yes, I'm all upset because I got my rear end handed to me 2 games in a row, 0-2, not fun. But
And to help the story, I was telling him how good my deck performed. My metalworker totally just slapped last night. I'm dropping just gargantuans on the board.
Absolutely.
Went 2-0 in our little weird pod that we do.
Oh, yeah.
And
no,
so that,
everyone
that
just
helped.
kind of let, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All that helped.
Look, it helps, right? To be fair, and I wish I'd have seen more of your deck, but obviously it helps when you can just goldfish your deck by yourself.
Yes,
right. When no one's interacting with you, when you're just basically playing by yourself, and I can just drop Metalworker and put out big spells, and the opponent's like, you know what? I'm just going to let you do what you like.
That's exactly. That is all true. No sarcasm at all. That actually happened. I did what I wanted to. It was amazing. But I wanted to kind of tie that off. That's where Feldon lands. Feldon lands on, May, you said it best. It is a singular card that requires multiple pieces to make happen. And while that can be a good thing, that requires the drafter to be aware of that. 2, it literally costs 6 mana spread across 2 turns and then doesn't have any haste mechanic to it. Now it requires, if you want to get haste, another component, right? So
I don't think the haste matters.
It could maybe. You would need better.
You would need 6 mana if you were able to give it haste for 0. Let's say Lightning Greaves, right? You've played Lightning Greaves early, so you're able to pay the 3 for Feldon, equip the Lightning Greaves for 3 mana for free. Then you've got to pay another 3 mana to activate Feldon. So it's 6 mana investment. So haste, I think, is actually irrelevant. Even a protection would be better.
Move your Greaves over to the Goblin Welder, use the tap Goblin Welder, sacrifice your Greaves, bring back your Mere Battle Spear, win the game.
Maybe in your games where you got to Goldfish, that might have worked, but unfortunately, that didn't happen.
All right, we've kind of beat up poor Feldon enough. May, I want to switch over to a second part of the conversation, which we've kind of touched upon a little bit, because there's a different argument, I think, to be made here. The next card that was in his deck, May, and I think you'll appreciate this the most, it was, as we talked about a couple times, poor little Goblin Welder. He's sitting here right now without his little Union card, no OSHA whatsoever, his weird skibbies. I don't even know what this guy's doing, but he just got a torch. He's literally going to do some TIG welding, and he's just doing it.
He's got like some automaton that he's standing on top of, right? That's how I look at it.
We can certainly hope so. It's just a weird piece of art.
It's a construct.
I love it. So, Goblin Welder, for 1 red, you get a 1/1 Goblin Artificer. Tap, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal, as the ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. So, May, I'm going to catch you up on this one. We've moved past Feldon. That was a component. I'm going to go ahead and say Feldon's going to get removed. Molten Duplication is going to replace it. Just does more. Do you agree with that before I proceed?
Yeah.
Okay. Goblin Welder in particular. So, Stu was saying this card failed me last night, too.
It did. This was definitely more the emotional reaction to the rest of the deck rather than a reflection on Goblin Welder. Because I will say that Goblin Welder only costing 1 red obviously puts it in an entirely different league. There's no activation cost. It's literally just tap. The only issue with Goblin Welder versus Feldon is the only difference between Goblin Welder from that playability perspective is Goblin Welder needs both a target in the graveyard and on the battlefield, whereas Feldon only needs a target in the graveyard, right? To make a token of. So this was something. Now, obviously, the first thing I think of is, number 1, what other artifact support can I have in my deck to make sure that I have targets for Goblin Welder? And secondly, what kind of value pieces can I get to target in the graveyard with Goblin Welder that are going to make it worthwhile, right? Now, worthwhile is kind of a loose statement because honestly, it's very easy to get value out of it.
Stu used a term last night, May, and the reason why I'm pointing this towards you, because you weren't in our little argument. Sometimes I wish you were in the car to break us up, but because you would have been like, boys, settle down. I mean, this is too much.
Yes. The obligatory, I'm the couples therapist.
You are the ref. You are the referee.
We need you. So,
and how does building this deck make you feel?
Show me on the doll where Goblin Welder touched
on the creepy. Show me on the creepy Lauren face.
Show us where the blowtorch hits you. Right.
So back to Goblin Welder. You used a term last night that I appreciated. You said Feldon was singular zone and Goblin Welder required multi-zone applications.
Correct.
That was your half-witted, drunken stupor as we're driving argument that came out, and it was pretty profound, actually, and I enjoyed it because it was a good statement that you required, whereas we were arguing that Feldon has an associated cost, deck equity, and must be set up, and yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And I'm giving Goblin Welder a free pass because it's a singular red mana, but he makes the point. This requires multi-components to be set up. Where do you stand with Goblin Welder in a artifact cube? And I'm asking this for a reason, unbiased on your part.
Goblin Welder is a fantastic card. However, it is important to recognize that just using it as a reanimator card is only one part of the equation with it, right? You are paying 1 mana to basically tinker. Well, not tinker. Trash for treasure. Something, right?
Yep.
So at any point, after your first turn that you play it, you can just keep swapping things around and generating value, which means that you don't have to have like a bunch of like generally high value picks because you're only paying 1 mana just to play the Goblin Welder, and that's it. So if you have like an Ichor Wellspring and then something else with an ETB or LTB effect, then you just keep swapping between those. Guess what? You're drawing a card every turn. Not only that, in the context of an artifact cube, you can target your opponent's stuff.
Correct.
And that's huge.
That's my favorite way to do it.
I see you decided to toss away this random garbage artifact later that you couldn't use. Well, guess what? Your good artifact that you just spent a lot of energy into, gone, and you get this garbage that you tossed away earlier in the game. The kind of 2-part equation.
Well, that's funny you should mention that. That's with purpose. So this was Stu last night. This is again going back to the curation and the investigation, the post-mortem conversation. This particular conversation, Stu was on the backside of that, where he's trying to play this, I guess we'll call it defensively, or on his own terms, on his creatures, trying to get the Mere Battle Spear out and whatnot, right?
That's the way that you win with this card. You can also survive with this card if you're playing against a stronger deck.
I have received feedback on the other side of the table in a previous iteration that this card is oppressive. They kept locking me down by killing my creature and making me swap with it. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. One half of this says I'm a machine and I'm a huge element to that machine, right? And then the other one's screaming, you're a spanner in the works. You're over here literally destroying my entire deck, and this is the most unfun Magic card I've ever played against. This card is so interesting, that dichotomy and this simple little 1-drop in an artifact environment. But yet it's beloved, even though it's creepy and got a torch and who knows what the hell's happening on top of that construct. But it represents so much in terms of my argument when you're like, well, this requires so many pieces. And I do realize this was the emotional response you're given. Everybody at the table is like, do never cut Goblin Welder out of this cube, because it is a signpost. It's like the Orcish Lumberjack for a landfall deck, right? That's running, forest, obviously. It's a similar vein. Do you agree with that?
I would agree. And again, emotional response. Do I want to see Goblin Welder cut from the cube? Absolutely not. It was a piece in my deck that I desperately wanted to get value out of. Again, defensively, offensively, whatever. I also look at cards like Mirror Battlesphere. It's a 7-mana creature to put out. It's not cheap, but it's not impossible to just hardcast it. There's definitely environments where if you're trying to cheat something out, then you need to do it really early in order for it to be worthwhile. I don't think Mirror Battlesphere is a card like that, right? If you're getting it out on turn 5 or turn 6 or even turn 7, if you're getting it out on turn 7, it's got a good chance that you can carry you to a win, right? Whereas with Goblin Welder, you've got that option. If you do happen to either incidentally put something in your graveyard to get a value piece, or to get a game-winning piece out early, or to interact with your opponent, then it can be an incredible piece. Again, it's only 1 mana. There's no activation cost. It's very powerful. In my case, I was looking at that as, I'm going to put this out on turn 1. And actually, the last game that I played against a good friend Tom, I had Goblin Welder out, and I also had Birthing Pod. By the time Goblin Welder got out, I wanted to get Birthing Pod out. I actually thought at one point I might just sack the Goblin Welder to the Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod gets Force of Willed. I did get Birthing Pod back with Goblin Welder. I was like, perfect. Now I've got an engine piece. All I need to do is get one artifact out, and I can start doing some fun things by sacking creatures to Birthing Pod, maybe getting them back with Goblin Welder. I've got some kind of engine that I can potentially put together, as well as what can I do to interrupt what Tom is doing. But Tom just slapped me with 12 power worth of creatures the next turn.
So I want to kind of put...
And that kind of abruptly ends that story. But that was the kind of, I've got these pieces out. I'm looking for ways to generate value. I'm looking for ways that I can interrupt his strategy. But by the time, and it was literally one interactive piece on his side, which was that forcible, because now I'm trying to kind of rebuild a little bit. The first game, it was, I've got Birthing Pod, or Goblin Water. I might have even had both. Unlicensed Hearse. That's the end of the game. I have no way to interact with it. I had no removal. It just didn't get past to me. I can't interact with that card. GG. There's no way I can come back. Everything in my graveyard is getting exiled as soon as I target it. It's over. It might be something like maybe I can try and do something on end step. Okay, I'll exile them with Unlicensed Hearse. I can untap and maybe do something while it's tapped. But again, the speed of that deck, as with the speed of the Hardened Scales deck, just dictated that I don't have time to make those engine pieces work.
Yes. So post-mortem, that's important. That's what we're doing here, right? Before you make a cut in your cube or you make a change, this exercise that we're doing right now, this Ode to Feldon, is an open discussion of a scenario, even though it was a one-time. And I'm going to give my takeaways as we tie this off. Stu was in mono red. Stu didn't get interaction points. Stu got beat by people who were playing multicolored. In one case, it was Dimir. They overtook you. And then the other one, I think, was the Hardened Scales, was Selesnya, if I'm not mistaken. But I could be a little
that's about right. Yeah.
But you're playing against the Selesnya. I hate artifacts deck to some degree with Hardened Scales, which mine was that too. And then you're also playing against the Dimir control deck while you're trying to do a mono red Browntown mixture of weird goblin. I don't know what the hell you got going on here, but that's the breakdown, right? And you wouldn't say that to a stranger, but Stu and I are friends, May and I are friends. We're having a dialogue here about whether or not Feldon belongs in the cube anymore. And the answer is, I believe not. May, do you agree?
So I'm going to interject real quick.
Yep, do it.
Because I don't want us to wrap up real quick before we start bringing in the important conversational point of how does this apply to, your cubes, right? You being the listener, right? So I actually have a very direct example and comparison, right? I have had similar conversations with a pet card that I have in the Fey Cube, Strands of Night, okay? Similar to Feldon, it is a kind of reanimator card. It is a 4-mana enchantment, and you can play black, pay 2 life, sacrifice a swamp, and reanimate something. So keep in mind that this is something that you can do at instant speed. This is something that you have to sacrifice a land for, so that is like a real cost to make it so that we can't just keep spamming a bunch of things. But you are paying a total of 6 mana and sacrificing something and paying 2 life in order to get one thing back, right? There is a very distinct disadvantage to it. There is that kind of live the dreamy thing going on similar to Feldon, right? So the reason why Feldon goes from your environment, but I'm still like digging in my heels about Strands of Night, right? Even if I do concede that Strands of Night isn't a good card, even if I do concede that the Strands of Night deck isn't quote-unquote real deck, there is a certain degree of, does the card that you are trying to support actually promote a kind of Johnny aha moment, or are you trying to trap them, even if it's accidental? So with Feldon's case, and Goblin Welder, and your engine, whatever you were doing, Stu, right? There was a certain degree of, I picked a bunch of cool engine cards, and I'm trying to do a thing. However, it didn't matter because I immediately got ran over by a bunch of basically aggressive decks. Or a bunch of decks that just generate too much pressure too early, and you don't really get a chance to establish an engine without, like, a reasonable amount of control cards.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Versus the Fey Cube, on the opposite end of the spectrum, aggro exists, but it's not the most prominent deck, right? Like, games take a little bit of time. Like, not a significantly long period of time, just, like, a significant amount of time. Like, 7 mana, like, bomb cards are reasonable in the fake cube. But when you have that in mind, you have time to experiment with those dumb engine garbage, right? You have time to experiment with these fun little interactions that can exist within an environment. So even though there might come a day where I end up cutting the strands of night or whatever, it's important that we kind of step back and recognize that this is something that can be applied to a lot of different environments. We are trying to create this kind of live the dream scenario with a card that potentially can do a lot. But recognizing the feedback from our players is enough for us to kind of reevaluate where it stands in terms of our cube's current metagame, how people are actually drafting it, and how it's actually interacting. So even though a lot of Stu's belly aching comes from a place of emotional discontent and skill issues.
It did, yes.
Skill issues, yes.
Skill issue, yeah.
He forgot to put gas in the tank, and he was mad that he didn't get there on time.
Yeah. But to a certain degree, like, it is still an emotional response, and that's still something we pay attention to, right? And these are things to consider as a curator.
I'll tether this off with some questions. These will be open-ended for the audience. And it's going to sum up what you're saying, and it's in the show notes. And this is just for the listener to ponder upon. How many pieces are required to support a synergy in your mind, right? You're trying to do a thing. What's your visualization of, I have enough to support this, just whatever number that might be. And are those components within said synergy, are they standalone? Are they homogenized enough? Or are they singular to such that they must be in this deck to be playable? That is a question that I think we should always ask ourselves. The next one that I put in there for layering is, are you going down the theme, die on this hill versus playability? And that's a choice that you make, especially when you start walking that path of thematic, because you always want to put in that one. A lot of people have been doing this. Have been talking about, like, they want this museum cards, these Monets, these pieces that you're seeing as you're passing around. They go, oh, that's really beautiful art, but it doesn't actually do anything. And that would be something like Johann, right? I mean, these are beautiful cards, but they're not playable. That's my point. But you have to make a decision whether or not you're trying to do that. And then that cube complacency that I talked about when I'm stating, I feel like my cube's in a great place. And we talked about that on a recent episode where I was talking about my power cube that Rashad and Port had just been sitting there for so long, I haven't noticed it. And because it felt like the cube is playing fine and these singular cards get kind of unnoticed or left behind, or they're hiding in sideboards, and you can't go around and look at every single sideboard of all the 8 players, yourself included, right? And then look at their deck tech. And I mean, you can with something like the Hedron Network, but we don't have that at home, right? So you can't do this post-mortem. And that was kind of where I wanted to tie off. This post-mortem conversation gives context to Stu's statements about these 2 cards in particular, Feldon and Goblin Welder, and where they came from and how we might look at that.
So I also want to add just the quick additional question that you should be asking of, since we know the context that there's always going to be a 15th pick card, right? There's always going to be a last card in the pack. No matter how perfectly balanced the cube is, no matter how close that we're trying to put the power outliers, no matter how close in we're trying to bring in those Johnny Get cards, there's always going to be a 15th pick, right? No matter what you do, there's always going to be a 15th pick in the card. Now, when we are looking at these pet cards, these things that we're trying to dig in our heels for, whatnot, are we okay with that being the 15th card?
Yeah, Feldon would be a great case for a 15th card. My tie-off with Feldon is, I see the rationale of it costs 6 spread across 2 turns, and it doesn't have haste capability. And that you have to continue to reinvest this cost to continue to get that effect. It's a card that simply had went unnoticed because of that creepy Santa Claus art with him staring at her face that's very robotic. And I just glazed over it and just kept passing the card, looking at other cards. And it's a beautifully rendered piece of art. And I just didn't stop to look at the forest for the trees, right? And read this card and go, wait a minute, this card is really overcosted for what it's trying to do in the current context of my environment as it stands.
Let me throw my hands up, okay? And yes, we're obviously talking about this from a curator's perspective, but I'll offer this as an opinion that's coming from a player, and I'll be critical of the reasons why. Again, might have been an emotional response, but I always look at it from a draftability and playability perspective as well. Why did I draft Feldon? Because I drafted it as a central engine piece. The same reason that I did Goblin Welder. The same reason that I did Birthing Pod. Though I did not want to have to rely on them, but I felt like, knowing what I do about the rest of the cube, that if I was going to stand a chance against decks that I've drafted in the past and decks that I have faced in the past, that I would need them to, right? That is not realistic for me to have that opinion. What I could have done and probably should have done, and ideally I would have done as the draft continued, is not looked at those in that manner. What I should have looked at them as is, I am trying to do something else, and if I do get an opportunity to put Feldon out, it's not just because I need that card to win. It's because that is just an incidental value piece that is going to complement whatever better strategy, let's be honest, that I'm hoping to rely on in order to win. Whether that be an aggressive strategy, maybe that be another type of combo, whatever the case may be. That was not the case yesterday. I was relying on that. Like I said, the deck didn't have enough strength throughout the rest of the 40 in order to win games against those other decks. So I have to be incredibly self-critical and understand that the deck that I drafted wasn't good enough. I expected that to be the case because I know the cube. So I will be critical of my deck, even though I understood that as a player. I also have to say, from, again, the curation perspective, how do you judge these cards, and are you judging them frequently enough as you make these upgrades to the other elements and the other archetypes within the cube, right? It's very easy to look at all the new shinies and think, man, that is a wonderful complementary piece to this archetype, or look at this new archetype I can introduce, without looking at that 40,000 foot view and thinking, not only am I powering up this archetype or that archetype or bringing in this new deck and functionality, but you don't have to do that very often before all of a sudden a deck that may have been a staple in the past, that may have been kind of clinging on by the skin of its teeth just a couple of sets ago, has now all of a sudden been pushed so far down the pecking order that someone like myself that doesn't play very often, and I have had good success with this cube and this kind of archetype in the past, all of a sudden, just a few months later, I'm playing it and thinking, oh my goodness, even though I have an understanding of how other archetypes work because I have played them recently enough to understand their power level, now I'm all of a sudden looking at that being so far back down that pecking order as far as power level is concerned, that it's not just a deck that is going to struggle, it's just not viable in any way, shape, or form, again, given the rest of the archetypes that exist and the power level that they have been pushed up with new introductions.
We're doing this dueling banjos. For anybody that hasn't seen Deliverance, it's kind of the little kid dancing. So I'm doing that right now as we tie this off. In defense of the hearth and defense of the cube, I believe that all-in strategies from a draft perspective can oftentimes fall into these scenarios.
They're trappy by nature.
You're digging in all the way and saying, this is what I'm going to complete.
Yeah.
I have observed better players than us that will do hybrids. They will do repurposing bay and maybe birthing pod, but they're not going to put Oswald Fiddlebindle in there just to splash that color for that triple redundancy. They don't. I'll use Bill as my case study here. They don't lean so hard into that strategy being the entire win con of their deck. They treat them as secondary and tertiary win cons. And this is a player's conversation happening here, where you and I have a habitual idea of leaning into something so hard that this is the single line. This is, I love glass cannon decks. Mm-hmm. You're a glass cannon player,
a glass cannon player.
We played Commander, we're glass cannon people.
Yep.
So if we play someone else's cube, I would offer this to anyone that Stu and I play your cube. You should take it with a grain of salt, because we are going to test the barriers of certain archetypes, but we do lean, this is a self-criticism of myself, as you did, we lean so much into a strategy. We push those thresholds so hard that we flop on our face and we say, this deck sucks. Yeah. And that's not fair to the cube designer.
It's not. The final piece I will say as well...
There we go, dueling bit.
Yeah, I'm going to get my banjo out now. The final piece that I will say as well
Longest
is that
off ever.
With some of these combo-y kind of style decks, right, I'm always looking at... we can take Goblin Welder. It's a very easy example. Take your Goblin Welder and then look at those payoff pieces. there may exist times where the payoff pieces are either impossible to cast or just have restrictions on them or complications, where really, unless you have that value, that engine, that cheaty McCheaterson way to get value out of them, that they kind of may fall into that 15th kind of pick scenario, right? Cubes can also evolve to a point over time. The one that you mentioned it's a big 9-mana artifact creature. It's a big boy.
Triple something.
Triplicate Titan,
Triple
right?
Frontier.
Triplicate Titan obviously is that live the dream scenario for something like Goblin Welder. If you've got a way to Faithless Looting that into the graveyard and get it out, what a wonderful position that puts you in. The problem also comes when those cards are not just pieces for that deck. They're very, very highly contested pieces because there's other way to be able to get value out of them. So now those pieces that I might be looking at that I might have had a little bit more of a safety net with being able to get as a player, if all of a sudden you've got other decks and other archetypes and other methods where you can get value out of those and they become stronger and higher picks, now you're not just fighting against the speed of the cube or the upgrades that have been made to the other archetypes. Now you're even just fighting to get the pieces that would have originally been put in the cube because they were the value pieces or the engine pieces for those archetypes. So that's another consideration when you're looking at how those archetypes and how those, even down to a color, can evolve in the cube. It's not just about the speed, it's again about how it lines up with every single other card in that 360 or that 540 or whatever.
So can we tie this off with the Ode to Feldon, but a little bit of Sarah McLachlan, please, one more time?
No.
In the arms of the creepy Santa Claus.
Yeah, creepy Santa Claus. That's it.
All right,
Goodbye,
thank you for
creepy.
listening. Stu's taking us to the socials.
All right. As always, to our Patreons, to Patrick, to Jeff, to Nick, to Chris, to Timber Dragon, to Brian, to Keaton, to Lord Justice, Nick LaPointe, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Huge thank you to all of you guys who have been our wonderful Patreon supporters for a very, very long time.
But I
love
promise
you guys.
we'll never dig you up and make robots out of you. I promise.
Well, I'm not promising that. Get in on the conversation at facebook.com/groups/MTGcube. Anthony is our little administrator over there. What are you at, 1,300 now?
I haven't banned anybody in like a year. I need some good action in there. Come and join us.
I don't know what that says about the group. I think if you're not banning,
These
you're not
people have
trying.
been super kind. I love it.
I think if you're not banning, you're not trying.
Oh, I miss it.
If you want to support the show, you can also use our inkedgaming.com/ubercube affiliate link for all kinds of custom and large volume products available for your cube or Magic experience. You can find us at Twitter at ubercubemtgpod. You can find us at Bluesky, ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social. Again, a huge thanks to all of our patrons at patreon.com/ubercube. And as always, come and hang out with us on our Discord. If you've got questions or comments about an episode or about the podcast in general, if you want to reach out to us, do it. We got those channels there. You can also reach us via email, ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. Again, if you've got a longer comment or thought about the episode or even an idea for an episode, we're happy to hear from all of our listeners. It's been a hot summer here in North Carolina. We hope that we don't melt, but if we do, we're taking Feldon with us.
In the arms of an angel.
And with that, we're going to say,
Happy Feldoning.
Feldoning.